Hey everybody, Professor Moore here. So today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, which commemorates the liberation of the death camp at Auschwitz by the Soviet Red Army on January 27th, 1945. When you look at black and white photographs of the concentration camps, it can sometimes feel that what we're looking at is ancient history, but this happened only 80 years ago, which is practically yesterday in historical terms. Even though the Holocaust has been endlessly studied, written about, and depicted in television and film, it is a sad and shocking fact that there are still those who deny that the Holocaust happened. There are still those who refute the fact that 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were exterminated in one of the worst genocides in human history. In fact, in our post-truth age of alternative facts, Holocaust denial is on the rise. In the past few years, we've seen Holocaust deniers run for public office. We've seen several acts of vandalism denying the Holocaust. And in 2019, there was even a case of a high school principal in Florida telling parents that he could not say whether or not the Holocaust happened because everyone has their own opinion on the matter. This is why it's so important to engage with the evidence we do have to show that the Holocaust did happen. When the Soviets and Americans began discovering and liberating death camps in Germany and Poland, they were shocked by what they found. They knew that they needed to have a record of this crime to convince future generations that this kind of evil truly existed. This is why figures like Eisenhower insisted that these death camps be photographed and filmed so that there could be no question that this atrocity occurred. After seeing a concentration camp with his own eyes, Eisenhower sent a cable to General George C. Marshall and said, "We continue to discover German concentration camps in which conditions of indescribable horror prevail. I have visited one of these myself, and I assure you that whatever has been printed on these camps to date has been an understatement." Eisenhower said that after seeing these camps with your own eyes, the evidence of bestiality and cruelty is so overpowering as to leave no doubt in their minds about the normal practices of Germans in these camps. This is why in 1945, the British Ministry of Information commissioned a film on the Holocaust, utilizing footage collected by the Allies. The producers even brought in director Alfred Hitchcock to supervise the film and act as an advisor. However, in a shocking turn of events, the project was abandoned and disappeared from history for nearly 70 years. Finally, in 2014, film scholars at the Imperial War Museum in London restored and completed the film. In 2014, the film finally premiered under the title German Concentration Camps Factual Survey. Ever since I first saw this documentary in 2016, I've shown it to my students every single semester because I believe that this is one of the most important films ever created. I've even hosted public screenings of this film for different groups and organizations because I believe that everyone should see where racism and dehumanization can lead. This is definitely one of the most graphic and upsetting films I've ever seen. I don't know if anyone can see this footage and not be physically and spiritually affected. I don't know if it's possible not to cry when watching scene after scene of the dead and the dying and the desperate still clinging to life. In this film, you see mass graves full of thousands of broken corpses. You see countless dead bodies that have been starved, beaten, burned, and abused. Even though this footage is horrifying and haunting, it is an absolutely essential resource because there are still those today who deny the Holocaust. This footage is our greatest weapon against those attacks. This film is undeniable evidence of the genocide against the Jews, and it should be mandatory viewing for anyone who questions the reality of the Holocaust. Another must-see documentary and critical piece of evidence for the Holocaust is the 1985 documentary Shoah by French filmmaker Claude Lanzmann. This is one of the most unique and powerful films I've ever seen. To start with, the full documentary is over 9 hours long, but it is truly worth making it to the end. The film features Lanzmann interviewing survivors, witnesses, and perpetrators of the Holocaust. You hear stories from Jewish men who had to watch their wives and children be marched into the gas chamber. You hear from Germans whose job was to exterminate thousands of people a day on an assembly line. You hear from Polish villagers who lived next to concentration camps and watched as countless lives were snuffed out and turned into ash in a crematorium. These two films provide irrefutable and ironclad evidence that the Holocaust happened, and they should be used to educate future generations on one of the greatest crimes in history. However, what these films should not be used for is an excuse for the state of Israel to abuse and oppress the Palestinians. Too often, pro-Israel supporters argue that Israel is justified in using extreme violence against the Palestinians because they are protecting the Jews and preventing another Holocaust from happening. But in reality, it is Israel who has engaged in genocidal violence and committed the Holocaust of the 21st century. Too often, the horrors of the Holocaust are used to justify anything the state of Israel does. However, there have been those brave enough to push back. In 1973, the Catholic priest and anti-war activist Daniel Berrigan gave a speech in Washington, D.C., where he declared, "The Jews arose from the Holocaust, a cause of universal joy, but the Jews arose like warriors, armed to the teeth. They took possession of a land. They exiled and destroyed old Arab communities. They, a minority, made outsiders of those who were in fact the majority of citizens. Israel entered the imperial adventure. She took up the imperial weapons. She spread abroad the imperial deceptions. Israel is an imperial entity and an Orwellian nightmare of double talk and racism, aimed at proving its racial superiority to the people it has crushed." After winning the award for Best International Film at the Oscars for his phenomenal movie The Zone of Interest, director Jonathan Glazer read a statement protesting Israel's genocide in Gaza. He said, "All of our choices we made to reflect and confront us in the present. Not to say, look what they did then. Rather, look what we do now. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. It shaped all of our past and present. Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people." There have been other brave acts of protest too. In Michigan, 86-year-old Holocaust survivor Renee Lichtman led a vigil and protest against the Holocaust Museum's support for Israel during the Gaza genocide. Last year, on her 80th birthday, Holocaust survivor Veronica Cohen led a vigil outside of an Israeli prison to protest the treatment of Palestinian prisoners. In each of these cases, these brave souls were trying to tell us that when we say never forget the Holocaust, it is not just about remembering the past, but standing up to violence and oppression in the present. That's why on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, we have to remember that the world has just witnessed Israel commit a genocide. Today, when we look at photographs of people paying their respects to the dead at Auschwitz, we have to remember that the reason why Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is not there is because the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for him for crimes against humanity. The Holocaust isn't history. This violence is still part of our world today. Today, the Israelis demonize and dehumanize Palestinians in language that is very similar to how the Germans demonized and dehumanized them. Over the past year, we've watched Israel murder thousands of Palestinian men, women, and children, just as the Germans murdered millions of Jews during the Holocaust. When we remember the Holocaust, it should never be solely about the past. Holocaust Remembrance Day should be about remembering this act of violence to make sure a genocide never happens again. And in this sense, we have failed as a species and a human civilization. We have not remembered the lessons of the Holocaust. We have not honored the victims of those who lost their lives at Auschwitz and other death camps because we still live in a world of genocide. Until we stop this kind of violence from happening, the Holocaust will never be history. It will always be a shadow of death that hangs over our heads and makes a mockery of justice and peace.